Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. This is part 2 of my previous video where I demonstrated all the types of shortcuts that you can create on the Ahmsville Dial and use in different applications. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the SpaceNav feature of the Ahmsville Dial and how to set it up and use the SpaceNav with SolidWorks, Fusion 360, and Blender. Those are the three CAD softwares currently supported with dedicated code on the Ahmsville Dial. So that's what I'll be going through in this video. Now, before I proceed with showing you how to set up the SpaceNav, I want to first explain how the SpaceNav communicates with the CAD softwares I just mentioned. So I drew up a little block diagram to explain this. All right, so if you take a look at this diagram, you can see how the dial communicates with the CAD software. So on the dial itself, the SpaceNav feature sends its raw SpaceNav data. That's from the tilting mechanism and then the sliding mechanism. The tilting mechanism is controlled by the MPU 6050, which is a gyroscope and accelerometer chip, and then you have the all effect sensor and magnet setup that I devised for the planar axis, that's for the X and the Y. So all this data is transferred to the companion app, which is running on the PC. Now the raw data is transferred to the companion app either through a USB cable like I have currently, or through the wireless adapter that you can also use with the dial. I'm only using the wired connection because it's more convenient for whenever I need to reprogram the dial for the purpose of this demonstration. So I'm currently on the wired connection. So once the raw data is transferred to the companion app does all the heavy processing like filtering and locking each axis depending on the settings you have. And then the final processed SpaceNav data is then transferred via a named pipe connection to an add-on that's running natively on the CAD software. Now, what this essentially means is for the SpaceNav to control your modeling environment, it does not need to take control of your keyboard or your mouse. It uses the add-on that runs alongside the CAD software. So it does not impede your use of the keyboard or the mouse. It's an individual device on its own, and it's able to control your modeling environment in the three CAD softwares I mentioned, which is SolidWorks, Fusion 360, and Blender. In the future, I hope to add support for more CAD softwares. One of the softwares I plan to tackle next is FreeCAD, but generally I plan to add support for more CAD softwares. But for now, you have support for SolidWorks, Fusion 360, and then Blender. So that's the general flow of data between the dial and the CAD software. So with that out of the way, let's get to how to actually set up the dial to use in this CAD software. Now, when I say setup, I use that term loosely because there is barely any setup required, especially in SolidWorks and Fusion 360. So the first thing you're going to want to do is head to the GitHub repository. That's the GitHub repository for the companion app. And then if you scroll down, you'll find the SpaceNav support. And I just have a few instructions here on how to get started with using the dial in the three CAD softwares I just mentioned. So as you can see, SolidWorks and Fusion 360, there's not a lot of steps to it. Blender is the only one that has a few more steps. So I'm just going to go through the setup process and just generally demonstrate what you can do in the modeling environment in these CAD softwares. So we're going to start with SolidWorks, and then I'm just going to go through the steps one by one and just try and explain what I mean in each step. All right, for SolidWorks, the first step is you obviously need to have SolidWorks installed on your PC. Yeah, that's a no-brainer, I think. Step 2 is you also need to have a working Ahmsville Dial version 2, either the Space Nav or the absolute variant. Okay, so for those of you that are not aware, the Space Nav variant and the absolute variant are the versions of the dial that has the Space Nav feature in it. Now, I'm currently using the absolute variant. The difference between the Space Nav and the absolute variant is the absence of the macro keys. So if you have the Space Nav or the absolute variant, you'll be able to use the Space Nav feature. So the next step is to install the latest release of the Ahmsville Dial companion app, and you can find and download the release on this same GitHub repository. So if you come to releases, you can see, so the latest release is version 1.7, and I've just uploaded this version. So once you download and install the companion app, you can move on to the next step, which says make sure you have a configuration for SolidWorks named SolidWorks. Now, what this means is, if you remember from my previous video, the dial uses automatic app switching, and it does so by recognizing the name of the active software. So it's important to name the configurations you are creating. If you are creating a configuration for a specific application, you need to name it with the same name as the application. So that's what this means. By default, when you download and install the companion app, you'll have a copy of my personal configuration that I use. So you'll be able to use that as a footprint for creating your own configurations. So step 5 says open SolidWorks, and you should be able to immediately manipulate the model using the Space Nav with no fuss. Now you can see there is really not much to this setup. That's intentional because part of my plan when I was developing the dial is to make it as easy to use and set up as possible. So long as you followed the steps in the appropriate order, you won't have any issue with using the Space Nav in SolidWorks. So I'm just going to go to the configuration and show you what you need to do to make sure the configuration works and you are able to control your model with the Space Nav. So if I open the companion app and I go to dial configuration, you can see this is my SolidWorks configuration, and you can see the name. It's set to SolidWorks just as I recommended on the GitHub repository. So I'm just going to scroll down. Everything you're seeing here, first knob, second knob, capacitive touch, you can set that to whatever you need. But the most important thing you need to set to make sure the Space Nav, on the dial is able to control your modeling environment in SolidWorks is to come to the Space Navigator section and make sure to check SolidWorks. So you can see the configuration is named SolidWorks, and under Space Nav I have SolidWorks checked, and by doing so you can see it disables the manual configuration, which means you cannot set anything manually once you have it set to one of the predefined CAD softwares. So if I go back to manual configuration, you can see you'll be able to manually configure all the axes of the Space Nav. But once you set it to SolidWorks, you're telling it to use the built-in SolidWorks configuration, and that's when it sends the actual raw data over to the app for processing. So this is already set, so I don't really need to do anything. I just wanted to point out that this is what you need to do. create a configuration named SolidWorks, and then go to the Space Navigator section and then make sure to check SolidWorks. So I'm just going to close that configuration and open up SolidWorks. All right, so I have SolidWorks open, and immediately if I move the Space Nav, you can see I'm able to manipulate the model, and as you can see, my mouse stays in the same position, indicating that I'm controlling this via code and not through and not by manipulating the keyboard or the mouse. So you can see I can translate, and then I can rotate the model also. Right now it's very sensitive, and I set that and I made it sensitive by default, but you can always adjust that sensitivity by pulling up the pop-up window. Now if I pull up the pop-up window, you can see I can activate the Space Nav, which means if I turn this off and then close the pop-up window, you can see it doesn't work. Okay, except for the knob, which is technically not part of the Space Nav. So to reactivate it, I can just check this box again, and then if I close the pop-up, you can see I'm able to control the model. Don't mind the sensitivity. I can adjust that. I can also adjust that in the pop-up window. So if I pull the pop-up window up again, you can see here I have tilt sensitivity, slide sensitivity, and roll sensitivity. So I can just move the slide sensitivity. That seems to be the most sensitive one. So let me just reduce that by a bit, and then close this. And then, okay, you can see it's not as sensitive, and I can translate pretty smoothly. So I can also rotate. You can see it's still a bit sensitive. You just have to play around with it and see what works for you. Let me reduce it further and see. Okay, yeah, yeah, it's a bit more manageable. So depending on the size of the model you're working with, you might want to set the sensitivity to a high number or a low number. That's completely up to you. So you can see I can roll the model, I can translate. That works pretty smoothly. So if I pull up the pop-up window again, some of the other things you can do is currently I have the Space Nav set to rotate and translate, and that's why I can do rotate movements and translate at the same time. So if I want to say lock to just rotate, I just need to select rotate, and then if I close the pop-up, you can see I'm no longer able to translate the model. I can only rotate it. So you can see how that works. So if I want to translate only, I can move to translate only also, and then I can translate the model, but I cannot rotate. Again, it depends on what you're doing. You might want to set it to one or the other. So if I pull up the pop-up window again, one more thing you can do is, now if you remember, we have two axes for the planar movement, and currently I have it set to translate in the X and Y direction, but you may want to zoom as well. So one of the things I like to do is I like to switch to translate and zoom. So what that means is it will allow you to translate in one axis and then use the second axis to zoom. You can see I'm moving the model closer and further as I move the Space Nav. The difference is not very obvious. That's because we've set the sensitivity to a low value. So let me just increase sensitivity a bit, and then you can see I can zoom in and zoom out, zoom in and then zoom out, zoom in and zoom out, and I can also translate left and right. So it's up to you what you do. You can set it to translate and zoom, or to rotate, or sorry, to translate only. By default, if you disable this checkbox, it's going to default to translate only. So you'll be able to translate along the X and the Y axis. All right, so a couple of the other things you can do. right now you can see the model is out of view. So if I need to bring the model back into view, you can see on the on my list of configurations here, I have MK-Tab2 set to zoom to fit model. So if I close the pop-up and then click on, MK-Tab, so you can see the model is back in view, and then I can manipulate it as I see fit. If you find that your model goes out of view, just click on MK-Tab2. That's just what I've set it to for my personal use. You can always modify it to suit your specific needs. So that's essentially the Space Nav working in SolidWorks. Now you can combine some of the shortcuts that I mentioned in my previous video to expand the ability of the configuration you create for your SolidWorks modeling environment. But for me, this is what I use, and you can go through this once you download and install the companion app. It should be there by default, so you can refer to it and then modify it to suit your needs. But that's essentially how the Space Nav works in SolidWorks. So we'll move on to the next application, which is Fusion 360. Now, the setup instruction for SolidWorks and Fusion 360 are basically identical. It's the exact same thing, so there's really no need for me to go through it again. But you can come to this page and compare. But essentially, what you need to do differently is open the configuration. So if I go to my default Fusion 360 configuration, you can see the name is set to Fusion 360, and this is exactly what the name needs to be if you want the dial to automatically switch to this configuration whenever you open up Fusion 360. So it has to be Fusion_360, exactly like this. So what you need to do, you can see under Space Navigator, you need to set it to Fusion 360. When we're working with SolidWorks, we set it to SolidWorks, and for Fusion 360, you just need to set it to Fusion 360. And that's all you really need to do. So once you have the configuration and you've obviously uploaded the code to the dial, you can just simply open up Fusion 360 and you should be able to control the model straight away. So if I move, you can see I can roll just like I could in SolidWorks, and then I can also translate just like SolidWorks. A way for you to identify when the configuration has changed, I've mentioned this a couple of times, is from the LED pattern on the dial. So I'm currently using the Fusion 360 configuration. You can also confirm this from the pop-up window. Okay, it opens the background, so you can see the active configuration is Fusion 360. And just like SolidWorks, you can do the exact same thing. You can deactivate the Space Nav and you can see it doesn't work, although the role will still work just like it did in SolidWorks. So if I pull the pop-up back up again, you can see I can do the exact same thing. It's the exact same menu. I can switch to rotate alone, and then that allows me to the Space Nav is deactivated, so I can roll the model alone instead of roll and translate. So, and if I pull the pop-up back up again, I think it went to the background again. Yeah, so if I pull the pop-up, if I pull up the pop-up again, you can see I can also switch to translate alone, and that allows me to translate the model just like it could in SolidWorks. One thing you notice between the three applications I'm going to be showing in this video is the operation is very similar between all three of them, and that's because the main processing is done on the companion app, and then the final processed data is then forwarded to the add-in running on the CAD software. So just in case you're curious, I can show you where you can find the add-in that is running on SolidWorks. So if you go to Tools add-in, and then go to the add-in tab. You can see Ahmsville Dial Fusion 360, and it's written in C++. For SolidWorks, I wrote that in C Sharp, and then for Blender, I wrote that in Python. So this is where you can find the add-in, and you can edit it if you want. If you maybe have something to modify, you can always edit it. That's one of the advantages of a Fusion 360 add-in. So again, very similar to SolidWorks, you can also adjust the sensitivity. Let me try tilt here. So if I increase it, you notice, yeah, it's very, very sensitive. Maybe it's too sensitive. Yeah, so let me just take that down. Okay, yeah, I think that makes a bit more sense for the size of the model I have opened. And you'll notice I can also move my mouse regardless of if the dial is manipulating the model or not. So again, the Space Nav does not affect your use of the mouse or the keyboard. It uses the dedicated add-in to control the model. So that's it for Fusion 360. We'll move on to Blender now. So if I go back to the GitHub repository, you can see the instructions for Blender. Now there's a difference between how you set up the Space Nav for SolidWorks and Fusion 360. Blender is a bit more complicated, and that's because Blender uses Python scripts, not a compilable programmable language like C Sharp or C++, which you have on SolidWorks and Fusion 360. So the first step on setting up the dial for Blender is you obviously need to have Blender installed. Again, that's a no-brainer. And then you also need to have a working Ahmsville Dial V2 SpaceNav or the absolute variant, also a given. And then you need to install the latest release of the Ahmsville Dial companion app. Yeah, I think step 1 to 3 is similar between all three CAD software. So what it says on step 4 is locate the Python version bundled with your Blender. It's usually located in this location that I have here. Now the location I have here is according to the Blender version I currently have installed on my system. So if I navigate to this folder, I should be able to locate the Python bundled with my Blender version. Then okay, that's Blender, and then yeah, so here it is. This is the Python folder for this version of Blender. So what you need to do, you need to go into the bin folder, and there you will find python.exe. Essentially, what I need to explain about the Blender add-on for the Ahmsville Dial is it uses 2 third-party modules that you need to install first before you actually install the add-on. Otherwise, you get errors. So that's what we're trying to do now. Okay, so once you locate the Python folder, we can move on to the next step, which is open command prompt and cd into this folder with a command similar to this. Okay, yeah, I'm just gonna open command prompt, cmd, and then cd, or I can just paste the command since it's based on my system. So just copy. I think I copied it. Then paste. So yeah, now I'm in the Python folder. So the next thing to do is to make sure you have pip installed. So you can do that with this command. I'm just going to copy that too. Oh, okay, yeah, you can see although I'm offline, it tells me requirement is already satisfied, and that's because I already have pip installed. I am offline at the moment, so um not quite sure what will happen. Yeah, it's also requirement already satisfied. So I already have these modules installed, so um I'm just doing this just to demonstrate. Right, so these are the modules that I use by the Blender add-on that allows the SpaceNav to work on Blender. Make sure you go through these commands before proceeding to the next step. So I'm just going to close command prompt. We don't need that anymore. So the next step says open Blender and navigate to the edit. So let me just open Blender. All right, so the next step says navigate to edit preferences, add-ons, and then click on install. So essentially, what we're trying to do, if you're a Blender user, then you know how to install a Blender add-on. So I'm just going to go through the steps with you, just for the sake of demonstration. So I go to edit, preferences, and then add-on. So if I click on enabled add-on, you can see Ahmsville Dial is already installed. Okay, currently it's telling me the script is missing. Okay, and I think I know why. That's because I just reinstalled the companion app. So I can just remove this. I can just remove that and then reinstall it. So I'm just going to click on install, and provided you've installed the companion app, you should be able to locate the installation folder. So I'm going to go to main and program files, Ahmsville Labs, and then Ahmsville Dial. So you can see a folder named Blender add-on. Inside that folder, you see a Python script named Ahmsville Dial. So this is the Python script or the Python add-on for Blender that allows the SpaceNav to work in Blender. So you just need to install this, and then I click on install add-on, and then you activate it. Yeah, so that's all you really need to do, and then I can close this. So just for the sake of reference, let me go back to the steps. So all right, so we've done step 6. For step 7, it says make sure you have a configuration for Blender named Blender. It's the same as step 4 for SolidWorks and Fusion 360. So I just need to open dial configuration again, and then if I go to my default Blender configuration and then scroll down, you can see the name of the configuration is Blender. This is exactly what it needs to be if you want the dial to automatically switch the configuration whenever you open up Blender. And you can just pay attention to the dial. You see that whenever I open Blender, it switches the color scheme, indicating it has switched the configuration to my default Blender configuration. So as you can see under Space Navigator, I have it set to Blender. So for SolidWorks, it has to be set to SolidWorks. For Fusion 360, it has to be set to Fusion 360. And then for Blender, obviously, it has to be set to Blender. So that's all you really need to do with regards configuration. And then you can add whatever you need to add to use the other controls on your specific dial variant. So I'm just going to close the configuration and then go to Blender. So I should be able to control the model immediately. Oh, sorry, there's one more. I think we skipped one more step. Yeah, so let's just go through step 8 says open Blender and you should be able to manipulate the model using the Space Nav after pressing Ctrl plus W. So that's the major difference between or that's the second major difference between the add-on for SolidWorks Fusion 360 and Blender. If you open up Blender, the add-on doesn't start immediately. You need to click on Ctrl plus W. That's Ctrl W to start the add-on. So if I go back to Blender and I click on Ctrl W on my keyboard, you can see it pulls up this Ahmsville Dial panel. This is just a way for you to know that okay, the add-on is now active in Blender, and just like on the pop-up window, you can adjust the sensitivity and then switch to translate and zoom. But you'd really want to make this adjustment here because it's more convenient to do it in the pop-up window. So now that the add-on is running, I should be able to control the model, and sure enough, I can control the model. I can also pull up the pop-up window to open the background again. So you can see the configuration is set to Blender and I can rotate and translate. The reason it's still on rotate is because that's what I left it at when we were working on Fusion 360. So I can set it back to rotate and translate. So I close the pop-up. You can see I can translate. Seems a bit more sensitive here. So I can adjust the slide sensitivity a bit. Yeah, and then it's more manageable. I can translate just like in the other CAD software. So I can also switch to translate and zoom, which allows me to translate left and right and then zoom in and then zoom out. So you can see I can bring the model closer or further. And then I can rotate as well. Again, when you're using the Space Nav in this CAD softwares, you need to figure out the sensitivity value that works for you. But by default, I set it to pretty high sensitivity values, so you can just adjust that to suit your needs. So I think that's it for how you set up the Space Nav in the 3 CAD softwares that are currently supported, which is SolidWorks, Fusion 360, and then Blender. As I mentioned earlier, I do plan to expand that list as time goes on. But for now, these are the 3 software supported, and I'm constantly improving this integration to make it work better and smoother. And so if you have a specific feature that you'd like me to implement, you can always leave a comment, and if it's something I can quickly implement, I'll usually get to it and then make sure it's included in the next release of the companion app. Right, so there are a couple more things I want to show you about the Space Nav. If I open the pop-up window, you can see for MK1 tap, I have it set to enable/disable auto orientation lock. Now this auto orientation lock is a specific feature that I implemented that allows you to model with the dials Space Nav. Right, so when you're modeling, let's say you're using the mouse to manipulate the model, typically you move the model and then release the mouse, and then the model stays in whatever position you've moved it to. So if you remember from the first video I made about the dial, the Space Nav mechanism is spring loaded. So what that means is as you manipulate the model with the Space Nav, it tends to want to return um, to the starting position. So to simulate the behavior you have when you move the model and then release it in a specific location, that's why I implemented the auto orientation lock. So if I activate this auto orientation lock by clicking on MK tap 1, this is MK tap 1. So if I click on that, right, so now when I move the model, it stays in whatever position I move it to. There's a bit of timing that you need to get right to make sure it stays in that position, and that's just something you'll have to play around with to get used to. So you can see it stays in the position I move it to. Currently, I'm not getting the timing right. Okay, but you can see in general it tends to stay in that position. The feature is not perfect yet. It's still very much in development, but it works pretty well if you get the timing right. So you can see it stays in whatever position I move it to. So if I deactivate the auto orientation lock by clicking on MK tap 1 again, you can see it's back to the spring loaded movement. So the model tends to return to its starting position. So it's just a mode that you might want to use when you are modeling with the Space Nav. If I open up the pop-up window again, you can see some of my macro keys here are set to some additional features. So if you take a look at MK tab 4, I have that set to Space Nav mode, and in brackets you can see it says tilt, slide, or boot. All right, the same thing I can do here. I can set the Space Nav to rotate and translate at the same time, or I can set it to rotate alone, or I can set it to translate alone. So I can do the same thing by just assigning that setting to a control on the dial. In this case, I have it set to MK4. So I can switch between this modes without having to open the pop-up window. So let me just show you how that works. I'm just going to close the pop-up window, and then just to show you that I'm currently rotating and translating, you can see I can translate and then I can rotate. You can see. So if I want to switch to say rotate alone, I click on MK4, and then now you can see I can only rotate. Yeah, it doesn't translate, and you can see this is, let me just try and hold it steady just to show you that it's not translating. So if I click on MK4 again, I'll switch to translate only mode. So you can see I can translate, but I can't rotate the model. That's because I've deactivated the model rotation. So, and then I can deactivate the entire Space Nav also by clicking on MK4 once more, and then you can see Space Nav is no longer controlling the model in Blender, except for the roll, which will always work because the knob is separate from the Space Nav. So if I want to bring back the control, I just need to click on MK4 again, and now I can rotate as well as translate. So that's just one of the things you can do. So instead of having to pull up the pop-up window whenever you want to switch to either rotate or translate only mode, you can use you can assign the functions to to a control on your dial, and then you can quickly access it by just pressing that button. All right, so I think that's going to be all for this video. But before I end the video, I wanted to show you one cool thing you can do with the Space Nav. This is my absolute favorite thing about the Dial Space Nav, and it wasn't planned. I knew it was going to be able to do this, but it's just so much cooler to actually see it in action. So I'm just going to show that to you real quick. So if I pull up the pop-up window and then switch to rotate only mode, I can literally pick up the model, and it's almost like I'm holding my actual model. You can see as I move the dial itself, it rotates it rotates the model. So this is one of my absolute favorite things to do with the dial. And if you remember from my first video about this project, the reason I'm able to do this is because the tilt mechanism for the dial is powered by an accelerometer and gyroscope chip, which is the MPU 6050. So this is just so cool to me. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but it can feel really intuitive to feel like you're holding to feel like you're actually holding your model. So it's just one cool thing you can do. All right, so that's it for this video, guys. Thank you guys for watching, and I guess I'll see you in the next video. Bye.